everybody, it's Holly here today with a new video for MarkerPop, and today we're going to be using some Distress Oxide inks. This video is sped up pretty fast because it was like over an hour long, so I was just kind of playing around and I came up with this galaxy background. I kind of did it in a weird way, but I was actually just playing to see what the outlook would come, so just kind of follow along with me here. So I'm starting out with a piece of Distress watercolor cardstock. And I'm starting out with a piece of acetate, and then I'm using my Distress Oxide inks one at a time. And I'm kind of smooshing them onto the paper. And then I'm heat setting them in between each color. You don't really have to do this step, but I just preferred to make sure I did this. And then I'm using pistachio, what is it, amber, and worn lipstick. Now, as I'm going in here, I'm noticing that some of my colors are getting a little muddy, and I realize it's because I wasn't cleaning the acetate or the matte in between the colors with water. I was just kind of wiping with a paper towel. So there was some residual color on the acetate. So I would highly recommend you squirt a little bit of that water on the acetate in between your colors as well. But I just kept going anyway. So building the color is basically what I'm doing here. And I'm pretty much running along. There's 12 Distress Oxide inks. I'm using all of them but the greens and the browns. And I'm just building them. This was broken china, and now here's some faded jeans for a darker blue to go around the edges. And I'm just using the acetate, and I'm also smooshing it onto the ink directly. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring in some black soot. Now this isn't an oxide ink, it's just regular Distress ink. And I'm putting this over around the edge. This is kind of where things kind of got a little out of my control, and the inks started kind of doing their own thing. Kind of used a little too much black. Wasn't really what I was going for. Had a vision in my head, you know how that works. But powered through and we kept going. And I really liked the way the outcome was, so I think it was worth it. So once I got the black soot on there, I dried it really good. And by this point, the paper kind of felt like velvet. So I just used my water bottle there and flicked some water on. And I'm using paper towel to dab it up. And then I heat set it to make those, the distress part really pop. I didn't really like the way the background looked, so I went ahead used an ink blending tool and the Distress Oxide inks directly, and I just went into the original panel I had there. Now, when you're doing this, it is going to pick up the black soot, so it is going to mess up your ink blending tool. So when you're all done, you want to make sure you clean those to get that black off before you try to use them again for another project. But I just went back in and kept using the same colors, just kind of layering them in over top. And I kind of like this because the water I spritzed in the background created those dots, but then the dots are still showing through, and the Distress Oxides are kind of giving a hazy look to it, to kind of more of a, I don't know, I think it's more of like a galaxy look, in my opinion, to the background. So I kind of did that, and then I decided to use some white gesso to create the little stars in the background. And I just squirted a little bit of that on my craft mat. And then I just thinned it out with some water and used the paintbrush. One thing you want to remember is these are Distress inks, so even if the paper's dry, anything you put on it that's wet, it's going to react with the Distress ink. So even though the gesso is white, I put it on a completely dry piece of paper with Distress ink on it, and over it's sitting there as it dried. It kind of picked up a little bit of the color, so it turned like a really light lavender color. But it's just something that happens, and it's still perfectly fine. And then I did have a little weird white blob there, and I just kind of wiped it up with my paper towel. And I just went over the corner with a little bit more of the ink, and don't even know it's there. And I just set that aside to dry. And then we're going to go ahead and start coloring. And I'm using the Space Explorer set from My Favorite Things. I already had these stamped in my stash on some Express It blending cardstock. This is actually my favorite cardstock to use to color with my Copics. I was using the Nina 80-pound. My Copics don't seem to blend as easily with that, so I just kind of switched to this, and it is still nice and bright white. So this is a really good cardstock to use, Express It blending cardstock. If you're kind of new to Copics and you want to kind of just explore with it, this is a really good paper to kind of start practicing with. And then I just stamped them with Lawn Fawn's Jet Black ink. And I used a bazillion Copics for this, so I will go ahead and put all the colors in the info bar down below. And I'll put which item I used and which colors. There's just too many to list up here on a thing. So I'm going to go ahead and play some music while you watch me color. Like I said, everything's sped up to cut this video down to a decent time length. So once I'm all done coloring, I'm going to go ahead and use the coordinating die cuts to cut them out, and then we'll be back to finish up the card. while I was going ahead and cutting out the images, I went ahead and cut out a top folding A2 size card base out of some 110-pound Nina Solar White. And then I also used the My Favorite Things Blueprint 27 to cut out a frame out of some black glitter paper I had in my stash. I believe this paper was from Die Cuts with a View. And so I went ahead and added a lot of adhesive with my ATG gun to the back of the panel. And then I'm attaching the panel to the front of the card. And I die cut this with a MFT die as well. And here's the blueprints I used to... I'm sorry here, I'm off the camera a little bit here. I kept trying really hard to make sure I was on camera. So I'm just using my Scotch 3M foam tape, and I'm just cutting that roll, the strip down into 3 pieces out of a strip to make thin little strips, and I'm just using that to cover the back of my little frame. And then once I have the frame completely covered, I'm going to go ahead and attach that to the front of the card panel. Like I said, after all this ink and water I added to the front of that watercolor panel, it does have a weird texture to it. It feels kind of velvety, so when you adhere your 3D foam tape to it, you want to make sure you press it down really good to make sure that it adheres. Now before I adhere the frame down, I'm going to go ahead and add my images behind it, anything that might be sticking out. That's going to hide a little bit behind the frame. This way I can just flip it over and add some glue. And I won't have to worry about trying to slide those down into or behind the frame once it's attached to the card. So here I'm just going to use some Tombow Mono liquid glue. Just going to put a couple little dabs of that down there. Then I'm going to go ahead and add the frame. And then I also used the same Blueprints 27 to cut out the banner that's in the die set with some white cardstock. And I'm going to use one of the sentiments from the Space Explorer stamp set. And I'm going to stamp that with some Versamark VersaFine black ink. And then I'm just going to add some foam adhesive to that as well to lay that in the frame. And like I said, I'm off camera here where I shouldn't be. But you can see it there at the bottom. And then I'm just going to go ahead and adhere my little space guy to the image. Now while I was coloring the image, something I kind of sped through, I did add some Spectrum Noir Sparkle Pen. The clear one, I did add that over parts of the image. So it does have a little bit of shimmer to the space guy and the planets. Kind of goes with that little border I created with the glitter paper. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere everything down with the foam tape, making sure everything's secure. And then I'm going to add the little space guide down as well. And that pretty much finishes up my card today. So make sure you head over to the MarkerPop blog to find out about our new Copics sketchbook giveaway. And I will see you again in 2 weeks with a new video. So hope you have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.